The year was 2287, and humanity had been part of the galactic community for 50 years. But most aliens still thought humans were simple and primitive. They let Earth join their council only because it was polite, not because they respected humans. Today would be different, though nobody knew it yet. Jake Morrison stood at his post on Unity Prime, the big space station that orbited Earth. He wore his security guard uniform and tried to look confident, but inside he felt nervous. He always felt nervous. His hand shook a little as he checked his communication device for the third time in 5 minutes. Today, the most powerful alien in the galaxy was coming to visit. Her name was Empress Zylara, and she ruled the Zarvathian Empire. The Zarvathians controlled over 300 star systems. When the Empress wanted something, people gave it to her. When she was angry, whole planets trembled. Jake did not want to be anywhere near her. He had asked to work in the back areas, away from the important visitors. But then something bad happened. One of the senior guards got sick that morning. The captain looked at the duty roster and picked Jake to replace him. Now Jake had to stand in the main reception hall. He would be close to the Empress and all the important people from Earth. His stomach hurt just thinking about it. He took deep breaths like his therapist taught him, but it did not help much. The big doors opened with a loud sound. Everyone in the hall went silent. Then she walked in. Empress Zylara was 7 feet tall with purple skin that seemed to glow. She had 4 arms and 4 eyes that looked at everything with cold judgment. Patterns of light moved across her skin, changing colors as she walked. Jake had read that these patterns showed her emotions, but right now they were dark red and orange. He guessed that meant she was not happy to be here. Behind her came dozens of Zarvathian guards and advisors. They all looked at the humans like they were looking at insects. Some of them smiled in a mean way. The president of Earth walked forward and bowed deeply. Other human leaders did the same. They all spoke pretty words about friendship and cooperation. The Empress barely looked at them. She gave a short nod and said a few words that sounded bored. During the ceremony, she made several comments about humans. She said they were young and simple. She said they did not understand the complexity of galactic politics. She said their technology was like children playing with toys. Each comment made the human leaders look more embarrassed, but they could not say anything back. Earth needed the aliens more than the aliens needed Earth. Jake stood against the back wall trying to be invisible. He was good at being invisible. But then the Empress started walking around the room, inspecting everything. She came closer and closer to where Jake stood. One of her attendants, a tall Zarvathian with golden patterns on his skin, walked right into Jake on purpose. Jake stumbled but caught himself. He looked up at the attendant, who was staring down at him with contempt. The attendant clearly expected Jake to apologize and bow. That was what always happened. Humans always apologized to aliens even when it was not their fault. But something in Jake refused to do it this time. Maybe he was too nervous to think straight. Maybe he was tired of being treated like he was less than others. Jake simply straightened his uniform, looked at the attendant for one brief moment, and then turned his eyes forward again. He did not apologize. He did not bow. He just returned to his post and stood at attention. The attendant made an angry sound. But before he could do anything, Empress Zylara raised one of her 4 hands. She had been watching. Her eyes focused on Jake with sudden interest. For several long seconds, she studied this human who had not groveled before her people. Jake felt her stare like a physical weight. His heart pounded. Had he made a terrible mistake? Would she have him punished? Would Earth lose its place in the Galactic Council because of him? But the Empress said nothing. She just made a small sound that might have been amusement and then moved on. Her light patterns had changed to a color Jake did not recognize. The attendant looked confused but followed her without another word to Jake. The rest of the ceremony passed without incident. Jake tried to forget about what happened, but his hands would not stop shaking. That night, Jake was working the late shift in the security monitoring room. Most of the station was quiet. The Empress and her people were staying on their ship, the Crimson Dominion, which was docked at the station. Jake watched the security screens and tried to stay awake. Then something on one of the screens caught his attention. There was a small red warning light blinking in Section 7. It was a service corridor, not an important area. The computer said it was probably just a sensor error, but Jake had learned to trust his instincts about these things. He pulled up more detailed readings. The power levels in that section were wrong. They were fluctuating in a pattern that should not happen. Jake frowned and checked the duty logs. Nobody should be in that section at this hour. Then he saw movement on another camera. Someone was in that corridor. He zoomed in and felt his blood turn cold. It was Empress Xylara. She had left her ship alone, probably wanting some peace from her attendants. And she was walking right into a section where the life support systems were failing. Jake's training told him to report it through proper channels, call his supervisor, follow protocol, but that would take time. He looked at the readings again. The oxygen levels in that section were already dropping. Sarvathians needed a different air mixture than humans. If those levels got too low, she would pass out in minutes. Jake made a decision. He grabbed an emergency repair kit and ran. He reached Section 7 in less than 2 minutes. The emergency doors had sealed automatically, trapping the Empress inside. Through the small window, Jake could see her trying to work the control panel. Her movements were already sluggish. The light patterns on her skin were flashing in distress. Jake pulled open the emergency access panel next to the door. His fingers moved quickly, disconnecting the faulty circuits and rerouting power through backup systems. He had done this kind of repair 100 times in training, but never with someone's life depending on it. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His hands shook, but he kept working. Finally, he bypassed the last safety lock and manually restarted the life support. Air began flowing into the corridor again. Jake watched through the window as Empress Xylara took several deep breaths. The dangerous colors in her skin patterns faded. She looked around, confused about what had happened. Then she saw Jake at the control panel outside. He quickly closed the access panel and checked his readings one more time. Everything looked stable now. He should go report this. He turned to leave. The door opened behind him. Empress Xylara stood there, all 7 feet of her staring down at him with her 4 eyes. Jake froze. He wanted to run, but his feet would not move. The Empress spoke, and her voice was different than before. It was not cold or bored. It was surprised and serious. She asked what his name was. Jake tried to answer, but the words got stuck in his throat. He managed to whisper his name and rank. His voice shook so badly he was not sure she understood him. The Empress looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that would change both of their lives forever. She told him he had saved her life. She said she was in his debt. Then she did something that shocked Jake completely. She bowed her head slightly to him, a gesture of respect. Before Jake could respond, she turned and walked away, her guards rushing to meet her from around the corner. They had finally noticed she was missing. Jake stood alone in the corridor, his heart racing, wondering what he had just done. He had no idea that the most powerful being in the galaxy was now very, very interested in him. And for Empress Xylara, being interested in someone was something that had not happened in over 100 years. 3 days passed after Jake saved the Empress. He hoped everyone would forget about it. He wanted to go back to being invisible, but that was not what happened. Empress Xylara announced she would stay on Unity Prime for 2 more weeks. This was unusual. Important aliens never stayed longer than necessary. The human diplomats were excited but confused. What did she want? Jake found out on his 4th shift after the incident. His captain called him into the office. The captain looked stressed and kept wiping sweat from his forehead. The Empress had made a request. She wanted Jake assigned to her security detail whenever she left her ship. Not the whole team, just Jake. The captain did not understand why, and neither did Jake. But nobody could refuse a request from Empress Xylara. So Jake found himself following the Empress around the station. She went to meetings with human leaders. She visited the science labs. She toured the observation decks. And everywhere she went, Jake had to be there, standing at attention, trying not to panic. The worst part was that she kept looking at him. Not all the time, but often enough that Jake noticed. Her 4 eyes would focus on him for a moment, studying him like he was a puzzle she wanted to solve. Then she would look away and continue with whatever she was doing. Jake's anxiety got worse. He started making small mistakes. He dropped his datapad once. He gave the wrong directions to a visiting diplomat. He stammered when his supervisor asked him simple questions. The other guards started teasing him about being nervous around aliens. One evening, Jake went to the observation deck during his break. It was his favorite place on the station. The big windows showed Earth below and the stars beyond. Looking at the stars always made him feel calmer, like his problems were small compared to the vastness of space. He was standing there, just breathing and trying to relax, when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and felt his heart stop. Empress Xylara stood in the doorway. She was alone, without any guards or attendants. This was very strange. Important people never went anywhere alone. Jake immediately stood at attention and tried to leave. But she raised one hand and told him to stay. Her voice was firm. It was clearly an order. She walked to the window and looked out at Earth. For a long moment she said nothing. Jake stood there awkwardly, not knowing what to do. Should he stand at attention? Should he leave? Should he say something? Finally she spoke. She asked him why humans fought so many wars against each other. Her tone was curious, not mean. She said she had read about human history and found it confusing. Humans had the same biology, lived on the same planet, yet they fought for thousands of years over small differences. Jake did not know how to answer at first. Then he remembered his history classes. He said that humans were searching for meaning. They wanted to understand their place in the universe. Different groups had different ideas about what mattered, and sometimes those ideas conflicted. It was not good, but it was part of how humans learned and grew. The Empress considered this. Then she asked if Jake thought humans were inferior to other species. Her eyes watched him carefully. Jake thought about lying, about saying what she might want to hear, but something made him tell the truth instead. He said humans were different, not inferior. They had weaknesses, yes, but also strengths. They felt things deeply. They could adapt quickly. They never gave up, even when things seemed hopeless. She made a sound that might have been approval. She said most people lied to her. They told her what they thought she wanted to hear. It was refreshing to meet someone who spoke honestly, even when nervous. Then she asked him about his life. What did he want? What made him happy? What scared him? Jake found himself answering, though his voice shook. He talked about joining the military because he needed structure in his life. He mentioned his anxiety, how crowds and attention made him uncomfortable. He admitted he was not brave or special, just someone trying to do his job without making mistakes. The Empress listened to everything. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised him. She said she understood loneliness. She had ruled for 200 years, surrounded by thousands of people, yet she felt alone. Everyone treated her like a symbol, not a person. Everyone wanted something from her. Nobody just talked to her. Jake looked at her and saw something he had not expected. Behind the power and the intimidating appearance, she was tired. She carried a heavy weight just like he did. Their weights were different, but they both knew what it felt like to struggle. They talked for another hour. She asked about human culture, and Jake did his best to explain. He told her about music and art and literature. He mentioned movies and books he liked. She seemed genuinely interested in everything. At one point, Jake accidentally disagreed with something she said about human nature. He immediately tried to take it back, terrified he had made her angry. But she stopped him. She wanted to hear his perspective. She insisted he explain why he thought she was wrong. So Jake explained carefully and nervously. To his surprise, she accepted his explanation. She even thanked him for correcting her misunderstanding. When they finally parted that night, Jake felt strange. The conversation had been uncomfortable but also interesting. The Empress was not what he expected. She was intelligent and curious, and she actually listened when people talked. The next day, Jake learned that the entire galaxy was talking about him. Someone had leaked information about the Empress taking a personal interest in a human guard. News outlets from dozens of planets were running stories. Some said it was a diplomatic strategy. Others suggested more romantic theories. Everyone wanted to know who Jake Morrison was and why the most powerful being in the galaxy cared about him. Earth's government saw an opportunity. They proposed something called a cultural exchange program. The Empress would learn about humanity through Jake, and Jake would learn about Zarvathian civilization from her. It would be formal and official, with reports and documentation. Nobody asked Jake if he wanted this. Nobody asked the Empress either. The Galactic Council announced it at a big press conference. Jake watched the broadcast from his quarters and felt sick to his stomach. How could he do this? How could he spend weeks teaching the Empress about humanity? He was just a nervous guard who could barely handle normal social interactions, but refusing was not an option. This was bigger than him now. Earth needed good relations with the Zarvathian Empire. If Jake said no, it would embarrass the human government and possibly damage diplomatic ties. The Empress made her own announcement. She accepted the cultural exchange, but with conditions. Jake would be temporarily reassigned as her personal liaison. He would have diplomatic immunity and status. Anyone who bothered or threatened him would answer to her personally. This declaration shocked everyone. The Empress had just placed her protection over a human. It was unprecedented. Some aliens praised her progressive thinking. Others were scandalized and angry. Jake's first official day as cultural liaison was terrifying. The Empress took him aboard the Crimson Dominion, her massive ship. It was like nothing Jake had ever seen. The corridors were huge and decorated with beautiful art. The technology was centuries ahead of anything humans had. She showed him the library, which contained information from thousands of worlds. She took him to the gardens where plants from 100 different planets grew together. She introduced him to her senior advisors, who looked at Jake like they could not believe what they were seeing. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Each morning, Jake would come to the ship. They would spend several hours together, talking about their respective cultures. She taught him about Zarvathian history, philosophy, and customs. He taught her about human emotions, creativity, and determination. Slowly, Jake began to relax around her. Not completely. His anxiety never fully went away, but he stopped being terrified all the time. He started to see her sense of humor, which was dry and sharp. He learned to read her light patterns better, understanding when she was amused or curious or thoughtful. One day, Jake brought her some human music. He played her a song by an old composer named Beethoven. She listened in silence, her light patterns shifting through colors Jake had never seen before. When it ended, she asked him to play it again. She said the music was beautiful and sad at the same time. Jake explained that was what made it powerful. Humans knew their lives were short, so they tried to create beauty that would last beyond them. Every piece of art, every song, every story was an attempt to touch eternity. The Empress was quiet for a long time after that. Then she thanked him for sharing something so meaningful. In that moment, Jake realized she was not just learning about humanity. She was learning to see value in things she had dismissed before, and somehow he was the one teaching her. 2 weeks into the cultural exchange, something changed in the way Empress Zylara looked at Jake. He did not notice it at first. He was too busy trying not to embarrass himself or humanity, but others saw it. Her attendants whispered among themselves. Human diplomats took careful notes. The galaxy watched and wondered. The Empress started finding excuses to extend their time together. If a lesson was supposed to last 2 hours, she would stretch it to 3 or 4. She asked Jake to join her for meals, which was unusual because Zarvathians normally ate alone or with close family. She invited him to evening walks through the ship's gardens. Jake thought she was just being thorough about the cultural exchange. He did not imagine anything else was possible. After all, she was an empress who ruled 300 star systems. He was just a nervous guard from Earth. The gap between them was too large to cross. But then came the banquet. The Galactic Council organized a huge formal dinner to celebrate improved relations between species. Representatives from 50 different worlds attended. It was held in the grandest hall on Unity Prime, with expensive decorations and elaborate food. Jake had to attend because he was now officially the Empress's liaison. He wore a formal uniform that felt too tight. He sat at a side table, trying to be invisible again. The Empress sat at the main table with other powerful leaders. Everything went smoothly at first. Diplomats made speeches about cooperation and peace. Everyone clapped politely. Then an ambassador from the Krellin Empire stood up. The Krellins were rivals of the Zarvathians and did not like that humanity was getting closer to Empress Zylara. The Krellin ambassador made a joke. He said humans were like pets that had learned to speak. Everyone knew they were useful for simple tasks, but nobody should take them too seriously. Some aliens laughed. Others looked uncomfortable. Jake felt his face get hot. The insult hurt, but he had been trained to ignore such things. Human diplomats had learned to accept disrespect because Earth could not afford to make enemies. So Jake sat still and said nothing, even though his hands were shaking under the table. But Empress Zylara stood up. The entire hall went silent. Her light patterns blazed bright red, a color that meant anger. She spoke in a voice that made everyone pay attention. She said the Krellin ambassador was ignorant and foolish. She listed human achievements that the ambassador clearly knew nothing about. She talked about human courage, creativity, and determination. She said humans had survived and thrived despite having shorter lives and less advanced technology than most species. That took a special kind of strength. Then she said something that shocked everyone. She said she had learned more about wisdom and perspective from one human in 2 weeks than she had learned from most galactic leaders in 2 centuries. She stared directly at the Krellin ambassador when she said it. The ambassador tried to apologize, but the Empress ignored him. She sat down and the room remained quiet for a long moment. Nobody wanted to speak after that. Jake was stunned. The Empress had just defended humanity in front of the entire Galactic Council. More than that, she had defended him personally. Everyone in the room knew who she was talking about when she mentioned learning from a human. After the banquet, the Empress found Jake alone in a quiet corridor. He was still processing what had happened. She asked if he was all right. Her light patterns had shifted to softer colors, showing concern. Jake said he was fine, though his voice shook. He thanked her for speaking up for humanity. But she shook her head with all 4 of her hands moving in a gesture he had learned meant disagreement. She told him she had not spoken up for humanity in general. She had spoken up for him specifically. She was tired of watching others disrespect someone she valued. Jake did not understand at first. Valued? Why would she value him? He started to make a joke about just being her teacher for the cultural exchange. But she stopped him by placing one hand on his shoulder. She said she needed to tell him something important. In Zarvathian culture, speaking about personal feelings was rare and significant. Leaders especially never revealed their emotions because it made them vulnerable. But she wanted him to know the truth. She told him that over the past weeks something had changed for her. She looked forward to their time together. She valued his honesty and his perspective. She appreciated how he treated her like a person rather than a title. She had not felt this way about anyone in over a century. Jake's mind went blank. Was she saying what he thought she was saying? That could not be right. He must have misunderstood. He asked if this was some kind of test or political strategy. She looked sad when he said that. She assured him it was neither. She was simply being honest about her feelings. She cared about him deeply and she wanted him to know. Jake felt panic rising in his chest. This could not be happening. There were 1,000 reasons why this was impossible. He started listing them out loud. The difference in their status. The difference in their species. The difference in their lifespans. He would grow old and die while she would barely age at all. He was nobody special. Just someone who could barely handle normal social situations. The Empress listened patiently to all his objections. When he finally ran out of words, she spoke quietly. She said she had been surrounded by special people her entire life. Brilliant strategists, fearless warriors, silver-tongued diplomats, but none of them had ever made her feel the way Jake did. None of them saw her as a person. None of them treated her with genuine kindness rather than calculated politeness. She asked him a simple question. Did he feel anything for her beyond duty and fear? Jake stood there, his heart pounding. He realized that yes, his feelings had changed. Somewhere along the way, between the nervousness and the awkward conversations, he had started to care about her. He enjoyed their talks. He admired her intelligence. He felt comfortable with her in a way he rarely felt with anyone. He admitted this in a whisper, afraid the words would break something. The Empress's light patterns shifted to colors that looked like joy and hope mixed together. She told him she was not asking for promises or commitments right now. She simply wanted the freedom to explore what they both felt. In Zarvathian culture, there were courtship rituals that couples went through to see if they were truly compatible. She wanted to do these rituals with Jake if he was willing. Jake was terrified, but he also felt something else. Hope. Maybe this crazy, impossible thing could work. Maybe he did not need to be perfect or extraordinary. Maybe being himself was enough. He agreed, though his voice shook when he said yes. The news leaked within hours. Someone had overheard their conversation or seen them talking closely. Within a day, every news outlet in the galaxy was running the story. The Empress of the Zarvathian Empire had expressed romantic interest in a human guard. Reactions were intense and divided. Some humans celebrated, seeing it as proof that humanity had value. Others criticized Jake for getting involved with an alien. Some aliens praised the Empress for being progressive. Others were scandalized and called it a disgrace. Several high-ranking Zarvathian nobles issued public statements demanding that the Empress reconsider. They said her relationship with a primitive species member would weaken the Empire's position. Some threatened to withdraw their support. Empress Xylara responded with a message that was broadcast across the galaxy. She said matters of her heart were hers alone to decide. Anyone who questioned her judgment on this matter was questioning her judgment on all matters. She dared her critics to openly rebel if they truly thought she was unfit to rule. Nobody took that dare. For all their complaints, the nobles knew the Empress was powerful and smart. Going against her openly would be suicide, but that did not mean the opposition would give up. They just decided to work more carefully. If they could not attack the Empress directly, they would target Jake instead. If they made his life miserable enough, maybe he would leave on his own. Then the embarrassing relationship would end without the Empress losing face. Jake had no idea what was coming. He was too busy trying to understand what had just happened to his life. One moment he was a nobody guard with anxiety problems. The next moment he was at the center of the biggest scandal in galactic history. And somehow the most powerful being in the galaxy had just told him she cared about him. He called his best friend Kyle that night and tried to explain. Kyle listened to everything and then said one thing that stuck with Jake. Kyle said that maybe Jake should stop thinking about whether he deserved this and start thinking about whether he wanted it. Life rarely gave people what they deserved. Sometimes it just gave them opportunities. The question was whether Jake would take this one. Jake lay awake that night staring at the ceiling of his quarters. He was scared. He was confused. But underneath all that, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt like maybe, just maybe, something good was about to happen. The courtship rituals began 3 days after the Empress made her feelings public. The first ritual was called the sharing of shadows. 2 people had to spend 48 hours together in complete isolation, with no distractions, learning everything about each other's lives. Jake was terrified about filling so much time with conversation. But the Empress guided him gently. They sat in a private chamber on her ship, and she started by telling him her story. She had been born into the royal family but was not supposed to rule. She was the 3rd child far from the throne, but her older siblings died in a war, and suddenly she was the heir. She had to become strong quickly or die. She learned to trust no one. She learned to hide her feelings. She learned that showing weakness meant losing everything. For 200 years she had ruled alone. She had advisors and servants and guards, but no real friends. No one saw her as a person. They only saw the crown and the power. She was so lonely that sometimes she forgot what it felt like to simply talk to someone without politics involved. When she finished, Jake understood her better. Then it was his turn to share. He talked about growing up feeling different from everyone else. He explained how his anxiety made simple things difficult. He told her about joining the military because he needed structure and purpose, but how he never quite fit in there either. He admitted he often felt like he was pretending to be normal, wearing a mask so others would not see how scared he was inside. Every day was a battle between wanting to connect with people and wanting to hide from them. By the end of the 48 hours, they both felt exhausted but closer. They had shared parts of themselves they rarely showed anyone. They realized that despite coming from different worlds, they understood each other's loneliness. But while Jake and the Empress grew closer, opposition to their relationship was growing stronger. A group of Zarvathian nobles led by Duke Zarthion began plotting. They could not openly challenge the Empress, but they could make Jake's life terrible. If he broke under pressure and left, the problem would solve itself. The attack started subtly. Rumors spread about Jake using some kind of mind control on the Empress. Anonymous messages called him a manipulator who was using the Empress for personal gain. Diplomats at formal events asked him complicated questions designed to make him look ignorant in front of others. Jake tried to ignore it all. He did not want to burden the Empress with his problems. She had enough to worry about. But the pressure kept building. He started having trouble sleeping. He lost weight. His hands shook more than usual. His friend Kyle noticed and confronted him. Jake insisted he was fine, but Kyle did not believe him. Kyle said Jake looked like he was falling apart, but Jake refused to admit how bad things had gotten. Then Duke Zarthion made his move. He invited Jake to a private dinner under the pretense of making peace. Jake did not want to go, but refusing would have been seen as an insult. So he went. The dinner was a nightmare. For 3 hours, the Duke subjected Jake to psychological warfare. He alternated between veiled threats against the Empress, promises of wealth if Jake would leave, and cruel mockery of Jake's worthiness. The Duke said Jake was weakening the Empire just by existing. He said enemies were growing bold because they saw the Empress distracted by a primitive human. He said billions of lives might be at risk because Jake was too selfish to step aside. This hit Jake hard because it aligned with his own deepest fears. What if he really was hurting the Empress and her empire? What if staying with her was the selfish choice, not the brave one? Jake left the dinner shattered. That night he made a decision. He would end the relationship to protect the Empress. He drafted a formal request for transfer back to Earth. He wrote a letter to the Empress explaining why he had to leave. He said he cared about her too much to be the weakness her enemies could exploit. But the Empress received his letter before the transfer could be processed. She was not surprised. She had been watching the pressure building on Jake and wondered how long he would last. What she did next shocked the entire galaxy. She summoned the full Zarvathian High Council and made a formal declaration. She announced that Jake Morrison was now her consort-elect. This meant anyone who attacked Jake was attacking the Empress herself. It was an act of treason punishable by death or exile. Then she publicly named Duke Zarthion and detailed his plot. She gave him a choice in front of everyone. Face trial for treason or accept voluntary exile to the frontier territories for the rest of his life. The Duke, stunned by the sudden reversal, chose exile. Other nobles who had been part of the conspiracy quickly apologized and begged forgiveness. After dealing with the conspirators, the Empress went to find Jake. She found him in his quarters packing his belongings. She asked if he truly wanted to leave or if he was just running from fear. Jake admitted it was fear. He was afraid of failing her, afraid of causing harm to her empire, afraid of not being strong enough for what she needed. The Empress told him something important. She said she was 200 years old and had built the most powerful empire in the galaxy. She was not fragile. She was not helpless. And she certainly did not need protection from someone she loved. Yes, there would be challenges. Yes, some would oppose them. But she had faced worse and won. The only thing that could truly hurt her, she said, was if she let fear make her decisions. If she abandoned something real and precious because it was difficult. She asked him to stay, not because she needed him to be perfect, but because she wanted him exactly as he was. Jake broke down. All the stress and fear he had been holding inside came pouring out. The Empress held him with all four of her arms, patient and steady, until he calmed down. When he could speak again, Jake made his choice. He would stay, not because he thought he was good enough, but because he loved her and trusted that together they could face whatever came. He asked her how they could make this work with all their differences. She smiled and said that was what the remaining courtship rituals were for, to figure out exactly that. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be more opposition and more challenges. But if they faced these things together instead of alone, they could succeed. Over the following weeks, they completed the other rituals. One required them to solve a diplomatic crisis together, proving they could work as a team. When a colony world faced civil war, they mediated peace. Jake provided insights about the human elements of the conflict, while the Empress brought her political expertise. Another ritual asked them to plan their future together. They discussed difficult questions about lifespan differences and where they would live. The Empress worked with medical experts to find treatments that could extend Jake's life. It was not perfect, but it gave them the possibility of many years together. Throughout all this, Jake changed in subtle ways. He remained anxious and sometimes awkward, but he developed confidence in his relationship with the Empress. He learned to trust that she loved him for who he was, including his flaws. This actually made him more effective because he stopped trying to be someone else. Their relationship began affecting the galaxy in unexpected ways. Young people from various species who felt trapped by tradition saw Jake and the Empress as symbols of choosing your own path. Interspecies relationships became more common and accepted. More importantly, humanity's status improved dramatically. Being connected to the Zarvathian Empire through the Empress gave Earth access to advanced technology and trade routes. Some humans worried about depending too much on this connection, but others saw it as an opportunity for growth. Not everyone was happy about these changes. A small fanatical group emerged, believing that interspecies relationships threatened the purity of individual species. They launched attacks against mixed couples. This created a new crisis that required attention. But Jake and the Empress faced this challenge together. They issued joint statements condemning the violence. They increased security for vulnerable couples. They worked with law enforcement across multiple worlds to track down the extremists. Through it all, their bond grew stronger. They learned each other's strengths and weaknesses. They learned how to support each other through difficult times. They learned that love was not about being perfect together, but about choosing each other every day despite imperfections. Finally, after completing all the courtship rituals and overcoming numerous obstacles, they were ready for the final step. The Empress formally asked Jake to be her consort. Not just in title, but in truth. To stand beside her as an equal partner in ruling the Empire and shaping the future of the galaxy. Jake said yes without hesitation. He was still scared. He still had doubts. But he also knew this was right. This was where he belonged. The wedding was scheduled for 3 months later. It would be the biggest diplomatic event in galactic history. Representatives from hundreds of worlds would attend. The ceremony would blend human and Zarvathian traditions in ways never attempted before. Jake had 3 months to prepare. 3 months to learn protocol and customs. 3 months to get ready to stand in front of billions of beings and pledge his life to the Empress. 3 months to become someone he never imagined he could be, but he would not face it alone. The Empress would be there beside him, and that made all the difference. The wedding took place on Unity Prime, which had been renamed Harmony Station for the occasion. Ships from hundreds of worlds filled the space around the station. Billions of beings across the galaxy watched the broadcast. Jake stood in his preparation chamber, looking at himself in the mirror. He wore elaborate ceremonial robes that combined human and Zarvathian styles. The fabric was beautiful but felt strange. Everything felt strange. His friend Kyle was there to help him get ready. Kyle tried to make jokes to calm Jake's nerves, but it was not working very well. Jake's hands shook as he tried to fasten the ceremonial clasps. Kyle stopped joking and put a hand on Jake's shoulder. He reminded Jake why he was doing this. Because he loved the Empress. Because she loved him. Because they had chosen each other despite everything. The rest was just ceremony. Jake took a deep breath and nodded. Kyle was right. He could do this. The ceremony hall was the largest space on Harmony Station. Thousands of guests filled the seats representing dozens of species. Human leaders sat beside alien dignitaries. Old rivals sat near each other for the first time in decades. Everyone had come to witness history. When Jake walked down the aisle, every eye turned to him. His heart pounded so hard he thought everyone could hear it. His legs felt weak, but he kept walking step by step toward the altar where the Empress waited. Empress Xylara stood there in her own ceremonial robes. Her light patterns glowed with colors Jake had learned meant love and happiness. When their eyes met, she gave him a small, encouraging nod. Just that simple gesture helped steady him. The ceremony itself blended traditions from both cultures. There were Zarvathian rituals involving the exchange of light patterns. There were human customs about exchanging rings and speaking vows. Some parts Jake understood. Other parts he simply followed the instructions he had memorized. When it came time for his vows, Jake's voice shook. He had to pause several times to collect himself. But he spoke from his heart. He talked about how the Empress had seen value in him when he could not see it in himself. How she had taught him that being different was not the same as being weak. How she had given him the courage to be who he really was. He promised to stand beside her through whatever came. He promised to be honest even when it was hard. He promised to love her not despite their differences, but because of them. The Empress's vows were eloquent and moving. She spoke about how Jake had reminded her what it meant to be more than a ruler. How he had shown her that vulnerability was a kind of strength. How their connection represented hope for understanding between all beings. She declared that their union was not just about two individuals. It was about proving that barriers between species and cultures could be overcome through respect and genuine connection. When they were officially declared married, something remarkable happened. Representatives from dozens of species stood simultaneously. They pledged renewed cooperation and mutual respect. Old conflicts were set aside. New alliances were formed right there in that moment. The ceremony became an impromptu summit where treaties were negotiated and agreements were made. Historians would later call this the beginning of the era of unity. After the ceremony, Jake had to adjust to his new role as consort to the Empress. This came with formal responsibilities he had never imagined having. He had to attend state functions, He had to make decisions that affected billions of lives. He had to represent both humanity and the Zarvathian Empire. These duties pushed him far outside his comfort zone every single day. There were times when he wanted to hide, times when his anxiety threatened to overwhelm him. But he found ways to contribute that played to his strengths. His attention to detail made him an excellent advisor on security matters. His empathy allowed him to connect with ordinary citizens in ways the Empress could not. His genuine nature made him effective in negotiations because people trusted him. Jake established the Interspecies Cultural Exchange Institute, a program bringing young beings from different worlds together to learn about each other. It was inspired by his own journey with the Empress. The program became wildly successful, creating a new generation committed to cooperation. 2 years into their marriage, they faced their greatest test. A coalition of conservative Zarvathian elements attempted a coup. They believed the Empress's reforms had weakened the empire. They wanted to return to isolationist policies. The conspirators made a critical mistake. They assumed Jake was the Empress's weakness. They attempted to take him hostage, thinking this would give them leverage. But they underestimated both Jake's resourcefulness and the loyalty he had earned. Jake managed to turn several of his captors to his side simply by talking to them. He listened to their concerns. He pointed out flaws in the conspiracy leaders' plans. He reminded them that true strength came from unity, not isolation. Meanwhile, the Empress moved against the conspirators with precision. She had known about the plot from the beginning and had let it proceed far enough to identify all participants before crushing it. The coup collapsed after only 3 days. When it was over, the conspirators realized they had never been in control. The Empress had used the coup to purge the most extreme elements from power, strengthening her rule. 5 years after the wedding, Jake and Empress Xylara had fully settled into their partnership. Jake had undergone life extension treatments that stabilized his aging. They now had the possibility of spending several centuries together. Jake still experienced anxiety, especially during large public events. But he had learned to manage it better. More importantly, he no longer saw it as a fundamental flaw. It was simply part of who he was. Together, they had become one of the most effective leadership teams in galactic history. The Empress handled grand strategy and political maneuvering. Jake focused on implementation and maintaining connections with ordinary citizens. Their complementary strengths created balance neither could achieve alone. The Zarvathian Empire had transformed under their joint influence. It became more open while maintaining its strength. Other empires followed this example, leading to unprecedented cooperation across the galaxy. Humanity thrived during this period. With access to advanced technology and new partnerships, Earth became a major hub for cultural exchange and innovation. Humans were no longer seen as primitive. They were recognized as having unique perspectives and valuable contributions. On a personal level, Jake and Xylara had found something rare and precious. A genuine partnership built on mutual respect and love. They had proven that differences did not have to be barriers. One evening, they stood together on the observation deck of Harmony Station. It was the same place where they had their first real conversation years ago. Jake still felt a little nervous standing next to the most powerful being in the galaxy. But now it was a comfortable nervousness, tempered by absolute trust. The Empress asked if he ever regretted the path his life had taken. If he ever wished he had stayed a simple security guard. Jake thought about it seriously. He admitted that sometimes he missed the simplicity of his old life, the anonymity, the lack of pressure. But then he looked at her, at the life they had built, at the positive changes their relationship had created across the galaxy. He knew he would not change anything. The challenges were worth it. The fear was worth it. The growth was worth it. The Empress told him she felt the same way. For 2 centuries she had ruled alone, strong but isolated, respected but never truly understood. Jake had given her something she did not know she was missing, a true companion who saw her as Xylara first and Empress second. They watched in comfortable silence as ships came and went from the station. Each ship represented beings from different species now working together. Their relationship had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose connection over isolation, understanding over prejudice, and love over fear. A new ship arrived, carrying the latest class of students for Jake's cultural exchange program. He squeezed the Empress's hand. She squeezed back with 2 of hers. They both smiled. The future they were building together was one worth fighting for. A future where differences were celebrated rather than feared. A future where someone like Jake, an anxious guard with no special powers, could stand beside the most powerful being in the galaxy as an equal partner. They had shown the galaxy something important. That strength came in many forms. That love could cross any barrier. That the most profound connections often formed in the most unexpected places. And it all started because one shy human guard chose to do his duty despite his fear. Because one arrogant alien empress allowed herself to see beyond status and species. Because two lonely souls found each other in a vast universe and decided to take a chance. What happened next shocked everyone. But perhaps it should not have. Because the most extraordinary things often come from the most ordinary moments. And sometimes all it takes to change the galaxy is one person choosing to be brave, one moment at a time.